0612 a.m. Routine morning patrol. The day began quietly. At 0612 a.m. local time, a U.S. fighter jet lifted off for what was described as a routine patrol mission in international airspace near a long contested region. Nothing unusual was expected. The weather was clear. Visibility was high. Air traffic patterns were normal. This was the kind of mission flown countless times before. 0618 a.m. Stable flight conditions. 6 minutes into the mission, the U.S. aircraft reached cruising altitude. No evasive maneuvers, no aggressive radar emissions, no deviation from the planned flight path. The aircraft's sensors showed clean skies. At this moment, there was no indication that the mission would become anything more than routine. 6:21 a.m. First contact warning. Onboard sensors registered something new. A fast-moving aircraft entered the outer detection range. Not unidentified, not civilian. A Russian fighter jet. This was not unexpected. Intercepts and shadowing maneuvers occur frequently in contested regions, but what happened next was not routine. 6:23 a.m. Russian jet closes distance. Within 2 minutes, the Russian fighter closed the distance rapidly. Too rapidly. Its approach angle was aggressive, reducing separation faster than standard intercept procedures recommend. Still, no weapons activity. Still, no emergency. But tension began to rise. 6:25 a.m. Visual confirmation. Both pilots had visual contact. The Russian jet maneuvered into a position slightly above and behind the U.S. aircraft, a tactically significant placement. This position allows radar dominance, visual intimidation, weapons queuing, but still, nothing had crossed the line. 6:27 a.m. Sensor alerts begin. 2 minutes later, the first warning sounded inside the U.S. cockpit. Not an alarm, a tracking notification. The Russian jet's radar behavior changed. It was no longer scanning broadly. It was narrowing focus. Unverified radar interpretation. Unverified OSINT analysis. Later suggested the radar emissions were consistent with weapons quality tracking, not routine navigation or collision avoidance. This has not been officially confirmed, but to a trained pilot, the distinction is unmistakable. 0629 a.m. Weapons lock warning. At 0629 a.m., the situation escalated dramatically. The U.S. fighter's warning system issued a weapons lock alert. This is critical. A weapons lock means the opposing aircraft has designated a target, calculated firing solutions, reached the final step before launch. This is no longer posturing. This is pre-attack behavior. 6:30 a.m. Cockpit response. Inside the U.S. jet, the pilot followed protocol. No panic, no radio shouting, no immediate counterlock. Instead, defensive systems were activated. Data links transmitted alerts, flight path stabilized. This moment was logged down to the second. 0631 a.m. Command notified. At 0631 a.m., the incident was no longer just between two pilots. Command centers were alerted. Tracking data was shared. Radar logs uploaded. Engagement rules reviewed. This was now a theater-level event. Unverified command timeline. Unverified reports indicate that regional command elements received real-time telemetry within seconds of the weapons lock alert. Official timelines remain classified. 6:33 a.m. The Russian jet holds lock. The most dangerous moment came next. The Russian fighter did not disengage. The weapons lock remained active. Seconds passed, then minutes. This is extremely rare. Maintaining a lock increases the risk of accidental launch, misinterpretation, automatic defensive response, yet the lock stayed on. 0635 a.m. At this stage, the U.S. pilot faced three options: lock back, escalating immediately, break away, signaling vulnerability, hold position, testing restraint. The pilot chose the third, and that decision would shape everything that followed. 6:37 a.m. Airspace becomes crowded. As the standoff continued, additional aircraft began moving, not toward the confrontation, but around it. Patrol routes shifted, altitude layers adjusted, surveillance coverage increased. This was no coincidence. 0640 a.m. Russian jet breaks formation. At 0640 a.m., the Russian fighter altered its flight path slightly, not away, sideways. The weapons lock flickered, then returned. This was not de-escalation. It was pressure. 6:42 a.m. Peak tension. The encounter reached maximum risk. Both aircraft were within close proximity. Weapon systems were active. Command centers were fully engaged. One wrong move, one sensor glitch, one nervous decision. That's all it would take. 06:45 a.m. The lock ends. Suddenly, without warning, the weapons lock disengaged. No announcement, no radio call, no apology. The Russian jet peeled away, increasing distance. The immediate danger passed, but the incident was far from over. 7 a.m. Aftershock phase. Begins by 7 a.m. The U.S. aircraft had exited the immediate area. The pilot was safe. The jet was intact, but the data was devastating. Log showed duration of lock signal strength engagement geometry. This was evidence, and evidence demands response. 7:30 a.m. Strategic decisions form. Within an hour, senior commanders were reviewing the incident, not emotionally, strategically, because weapon locks are not accidents. They are messages, and this time, the message was received, because what happened next was not a protest, not a warning, and not a statement. It was a coordinated response that unfolded across airspace, seas, and command centers, a response many would later describe as America unleashing hell. 7:45 a.m. The data review begins by 7:45 a.m. The confrontation was no longer just an aerial incident. It had become a data-driven crisis. Flight logs were downloaded, radar recordings replayed frame by frame, signal strength charts overlaid with engagement geometry. This wasn't speculation. This was forensic reconstruction, unverified, data interpretation, unverified OSINT. Analysts later suggested the Russian fighter maintained a weapons-quality radar lock for over 90 seconds, far longer than standard intercept behavior. Official confirmation has not been released. If accurate, this crossed a red line. 8:20 a.m. Pentagon. Alert level. Internal alert levels were quietly adjusted. No press release, no public statement, but posture shifted. Rapid response squadrons placed on standby. Additional surveillance sorties approved, naval aviation assets repositioned. This was preparation. 9:05 a.m. Diplomatic channels activate. While pilots rested and analysts worked, diplomats moved. At 9:05 a.m., emergency communication channels were opened. Formal language, controlled tone, but the message was clear. Weapon locks are not miscalculations. There was no denial, no apology, only silence. 10:30 a.m. America moves quietly. By mid-morning, the response was already underway. Quietly, additional U.S. aircraft entered the region. Not aggressively, not publicly, but strategically spaced, creating layered coverage. From above, it looked routine. From radar screens, it looked like dominance. 11:45 a.m. Russian radars notice. At 11:45 a.m., Russian monitoring systems detected the change. Increased patrol density, overlapping radar coverage, persistent airborne presence. This wasn't coincidence. This was signaling. 12:30 p.m. Midday. Escalation point. The encounter had shifted phases. The original incident was over. Now came response calibration. Commanders weighed options: mirror the aggression, demonstrate restraint, or overwhelm with presence. The third option was chosen. 1:15 p.m. AIR power. Surges at 1:15 p.m. Multiple U.S. aircraft entered synchronized patrol patterns. Not intercepts, not confrontations, but airspace dominance missions. Each aircraft supported another. Each sensor fed the network. The sky became layered, watched, controlled. Unverified force composition. Unverified reports suggest a mix of fighters, early warning aircraft, and electronic surveillance platforms participated. Official aircraft numbers remain undisclosed. 2:40 p.m. Naval assets. Shift position. By 2:40 p.m., the response expanded beyond the air. Naval units adjusted their formation. Flight decks became active. Launch cycles shortened. Readiness levels increased. No weapons were fired, but every system was awake. 3:30 p.m. The message is received. By mid-afternoon, the message was unmistakable. This wasn't retaliation. It was containment through superiority. Every Russian aircraft movement was tracked, every radar emission cataloged, every maneuver matched. The balance had shifted. 4:50 p.m. Russian air activity decreases at 4:50 p.m. Something telling happened. Russian air activity began to slow. Fewer sorties, greater distance, less aggressive positioning. This was not withdrawal, it was recalculation. 6:10 p.m. Nightfall changes everything. As daylight faded, risk increased. Night operations compress reaction time. Visual cues disappear. Sensors dominate. This is where mistakes happen, and this is where doctrine matters. 7 p.m. USNIGHTDOMINANCE. By 7 p.m., the U.S. posture entered a new phase. Night-capable aircraft rotated in. Electronic warfare coverage intensified. Command centers went fully manned. This wasn't escalation, this was control. 8:30 p.m., Russian response fails to materialize. Despite heightened alert levels, there was no Russian countermove, no aggressive intercepts, no radar locks, no mirror maneuver, just presence and distance. 9:45 p.m. Strategic review. Late in the evening, senior leadership conducted a full review. What mattered most wasn't what happened, it was what didn't. No missile launches, no collision, no casualties, but also no acceptance of the initial act. 10:30 p.m. Final signal. Before midnight, one last move was made. A patrol flew. Deliberately visible, legally compliant, unmistakably confident. Not a threat, a reminder. 11:55 p.m. Day ends, consequences begin. As the day closed, the confrontation officially ended, but the consequences did not. From that moment forward, rules of engagement hardened, patrol patterns changed, tolerance thresholds dropped, weapon locks would no longer be ignored. This incident sent shockwaves beyond the region. Allies noticed, adversaries recalculated, analysts rewrote risk models. Because the message was simple: locking weapons is escalation, and escalation has a price. This wasn't about one jet, or one pilot, or one moment in the sky. It was about how close modern militaries operate, and how quickly routine can become catastrophic. This time, restraint held. Next time, that remains uncertain.